And speaking of elites, Mr. Keene, in the year 2000, after the Columbine shooting in 1999, Bill Clinton touted how he had roughly $60 million appropriated to put armed guards in schools all across the country.
You know, this is the most amazing thing. Because of this cultural divide, what one suggests and what one supports is not as important as who one is. So, for example, in the 1970s in Israel, there was a whole spate of shootings, and I've said their crazy people listen to a different voice than some of our crazy people do, but the result was the same. At first, volunteers, veterans, came forward and provided security at their schools. Later, it became institutionalized. Now it's being done by private contractors, not by the military or the police. By coincidence, right after Newtown, I was in Israel, and I was visiting a facility where those guards are trained. When Israel decided to protect its students, that was a rational thing to do. After Columbine, when Bill Clinton suggested that the world had changed and we needed to protect students attending our schools, Democrats in Congress praised it, voted for it. It was a rational thing to do. 2 of the first grants went to New York at the request of Senator Schumer, who said we're living in a different age and we have to protect our kids. And the largest early grant, of course, went to Nancy Pelosi's district in California. Those were rational things. When Wayne LaPierre suggested, in the wake of Newtown, that we need to provide security for our students, it was described by these very same people as insane. And the fact of the matter is that as time went on, the public has come forward and said, you know, what we want to know is not whether you like some guns and don't like some other guns because you consider them ugly, or how many shots are in a magazine. That we want to know how you keep those guns out of the hands of crazy people and criminals, and secondly, we want to know the answer to one simple question: how can we send our kids to school and be assured that they're protected? Now, you can't always identify somebody who's got something wrong with them and who goes crazy and is going to either blow up a school, or burn down a school, shoot people, or whatever. You got to try to do that, but you also have to protect the kids, and that's what they do in Israel. That's what Bill Clinton recognized. That's what we recognize. And it's interesting because since that whole discussion began, we have received 2 things. One, well over 1,000 retired law enforcement officers have said, we're ready. We'll volunteer to protect schools in our areas. All they have to do is ask. We've also received letters and calls from hundreds of schools that already have private protection. Some of them, there are 23,000 schools in this country who are protected under the successor legislation to what Clinton proposed. There are thousands of others who have private protection that's not paid for by taxpayers, and there are others that are protected now by volunteers or by faculty and teachers who have taken firearms training and are prepared for whatever might happen at their school. That is not irrational. That's not insane. That's something that we have to consider as part of the mix in trying to protect our kids.
Absolutely. And sir, I don't know if you heard about this, but in one of the 5 boroughs here in the city, in Staten Island, the parents that make up the Community Education Council voted there in favor of having armed guards in their schools in the borough of Staten Island. And the chancellor of the City Department of Education, under Mayor Bloomberg, has already said that he's going to veto that board vote. And that vote, while mainly symbolic, shows you that even people here in New York City, one of the bluest cities in the world, are hearing the message. So I just wanted to let you know that all of us here in New York we're not all the liberal maniacs that everybody seems to think we are. But you know what? And listening to you, it's a world gone mad out there, sir. And what I want to know is, there has to be a point where we come together. What is the balance that we must strike?
That's exactly right. I mean, when you look at the reality of the world we live in, and when you look at the way normal Americans feel about what they're seeing going on around them, it's very different from what the Michael Bloombergs and the media elites see. The Gallup poll asked the questions of what do you think needs to be done? And they said, first, we need to provide security for the schools. Secondly, we need to do something about the mentally ill. Every one of these shooters has been crazy. You're right there in New York, in Queens, not too long ago. A woman pushed a fellow under a subway train. You remember that just a week or so ago.
Yes.
If her brain hadn't blown when it did, she might have gotten access to some weapons and killed a lot more people. But think about what happened before she did that. She had been diagnosed as a violence-prone schizophrenic. She refused to take her medicine. Her mother had called the police numerous times. She'd had more than a dozen encounters with the police. She'd committed assault against a police officer and against others, and nobody did anything about it until she went crazy and killed somebody. Virtually every one of these shooters has been brought to the attention of people who've known that there's something wrong. You know, interestingly, in the Aurora shooting, the only person who took any action was when the shooter tried to buy a gun from a gun dealer. He looked at him and said, "This guy's crazy. I'm not selling him a gun." But the mental health professionals, the law enforcement people that had encountered him, did they do anything? No. Did the school that was actually tracking him and providing him psychiatric assistance, did they do anything? No, they didn't. The NRA, since you remember one of the first school shootings of recent times took place in 1966 at the University of Texas when the fellow climbed up in the clock tower and shot a bunch of students. He had told his psychiatrist that he was going to climb up in the clock tower and shoot a bunch of students, and then he did it. And since that time, we've taken the position that if someone is adjudicated, as many of these people were, has been adjudicated to be potentially dangerously mentally ill, to be a violent schizophrenic, for example, that they should be on the registry, the national registry, so that if they go into a gun shop and try to buy a gun, they shouldn't be allowed to buy one, just as a convicted felon can't buy a gun. The fact is that we've been urging that since the instant check system began, and most states today, because of, quote, budgetary restrictions and because of the ACLU, have refused to put those people into the system so that somebody like that can walk into a store and buy a gun. We shouldn't be arguing about whether they can have what kind of gun they can buy. We shouldn't be arguing about how many bullets they can put into the magazine. We should be trying to find a way to keep firearms out of the hands of those who are demonstrably unstable and a threat to themselves and their community. That's a logical thing to do. And then we need to find a way to provide protection while we're rebuilding our mental health system so that those people can get treatment to protect our kids while that's going on. I mean, it's interesting because in this society over the last 2 decades, the number of firearms in private hands has skyrocketed. And the number of homicides has decreased incredibly over that same period of time. What has been taking place here and in other countries as well, every place from Norway to China, have been these mass killings by people who are mentally unstable. And what has to be dealt with is those people, how to identify them, how to keep them away from vulnerable targets, and how to protect our children and other innocents from being victims when they go nuts, because that's what's happening.
Hey, sir, I want to thank you for your time. I have one last question for you. Do you believe that this administration is acting in good faith when a day before Vice President Biden is supposed to meet with members from various gun advocacy groups is out there threatening that President Obama will use executive orders if they don't get their way?
Barack Obama, through his entire career before he ever ran for office, has been against the Second Amendment. He has in the past said he does not think any private citizen has a right to own a firearm. Joe Biden, when he ran for president, which was the last time before becoming vice president that he commented on firearms, was asked a question at a debate, blew up and told the person who thought he had a right to own a gun that he was crazy. These are people who are pursuing an ideological agenda and using the tragedy of Connecticut as a way to get back into doing this. And I don't think that. I think they're being disingenuous. I think that they've seen this as an opportunity to go after the Second Amendment, which they've wanted to do for years, if not decades. And I think they're going to do everything they can to strip Americans of their right to keep and bear arms, to essentially make the Second Amendment meaningless. And I think that because they know they're not going to get this in Congress, and they're not going to get this in the court, that they're going to try to use executive orders and just essentially tell everybody that we're ruling by fiat.
Well, listen, David, I know you got to get back to the board meetings with the NRA, which I guess were going on today. Listen, thank you so much for coming on the show, and best of luck with everything. And Russ and I will definitely see you down in D.C. for CPAC. Hope
I'll be there.
Together.
Okay,
Absolutely.
thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, David. Have a great night.